So Professor Good, I'm Jiayin Zhao, and today I'm going to ask you some questions about my topic, how social media affects daily communication. This interview will last about 30 minutes, and it will include 12 questions of all the interview. Professor Good, you are interested in facial expressions as well as body language in communication process. So, do you think communication on social media without body language and facial expressions still work out to express feeling or something underlying? Why?
Social media, you can express emotions and thoughts, but you're doing it through words and emojicons, right, and other sorts of symbols, where you can, I think, convey a lot of information, and especially I think these days people kind of understand the various, symbols and words, that shortened words and things like that that you might be using. But I think there's still something lacking there versus face-to-face interaction, because there's, the kind of primordial spot of human interaction is face-to-face, right? I mean, that's really sort of the best way to communicate with someone, at least in my opinion. And because you get to see the person, get to see their facial expression, see how their body's moving, see the things that they're referring to, right? I mean, you just kind of get that sort of face-to-face presence. So I think that is obviously lacking in social media. People are trying to find ways to express those things, but I'm sure most people still have those moments where they're reading a message and they're like, I'm not sure if you're joking, if you're mad, are you being sarcastic, or what's the tone here? Where I think emojicons can help, sort of, a smiley face or a angry face or something kind of carries the sort of emotion that you're trying to portray. But that can be, I think, difficult, or not as good over social media as it is face-to-face.
Like somebody wants to say, I don't like you, but he or she types, I like you on screen, so you never know whether she or he likes you.
Right. I mean, there can definitely be misunderstandings, depending on how people phrase certain things. I think with autocorrect, right, sometimes your message gets changed without even looking, and then you have to go and fix that. So I think social media and texting and all, electronic sort of communication has its place, and it does certain things, but I don't think it's a substitute for face-to-face communication. So
I think communication on social media affects two kinds of conversation with people, like distance with strangers and decreased expectations and satisfaction with close friends. So with strangers, people often omit greeting process in social media. So do you think this situation affects communication because it's obey this normal communication process, like greeting process?
Yeah, I think it gets complicated because I think there's certain scripts that we sort of follow in face-to-face communication when we're with a person and we're used to having the greetings and those sorts of things. But I don't know if that's always the norm with social media, that, is that then something that goes away? Not being on social media myself and not having studied it a lot, I'm aware of social media and its presence and those sorts of things, but kind of thinking about how people greet one another, I think I think it starts coming with its own sort of rules of, do you just omit greetings and say, hey, how are you, good, and just kind of go right into the message. I think just in like text messaging, I think we tend to do that, or at least myself and others I know tend to do, omit a lot of the greetings, because you know who you're sending the message to, and that they're receiving it, and you just kind of go into just whatever the message is. Right? It is definitely different. You start seeing that it's kind of two different worlds of communication, sort of the online social media sort of side of things, and then a more traditional face-to-face side.
So do you think if you type like, how are you, like this kind of things on social media, the same way to say, hello, how are you in the real world?
We kind of expect at least like a hi, how are you, some version of that when we're face-to-face. I think that's very much ingrained in the American culture, and I think a lot of other cultures as well. For online or for texting, I don't think, we might eliminate a lot of hi, right? Unless it's someone we don't know that well, and maybe we're not sure if they have our phone number or our Facebook address, and we'd have to kind of identify like, hi, it's Jeff, this sort of thing. I think it's probably, and especially if you're thinking of something where character space is limited, you might eliminate the greeting and just get to the, I saw the funniest thing today, or what are you doing this evening, minus those, hey, how's it going, how's your day, some things we might see. So I think they have kind of different rules and regulations, and I think we expect different things out of social media or texting versus face-to-face. But I think there's also a lot of kind of convergence now, because the more people are used to being on texting and Facebook and Twitter and all these social media, I think a lot of that interaction starts bleeding into kind of the way that they interact with other people. So we start seeing some different styles of interacting, and especially if people are communicating more via social media than face-to-face, then the face-to-face becomes maybe a little bit awkward for them, right? So they're so used to not seeing the person, right? And so it's interesting. It's very different.
I saw reading you assigned to us, young people use the mobile phone are particularly like to engage in the mode of friendship that entails short, target calls rather than long, engaged conversations. So do you think contact with friends with social network without real-world communication still maintain a relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can. I think it becomes a different type of relationship. I'm more of the older school sort of style of longer talks with people, or talking a long time with them face to face, or having longer phone conversations, or sending longer emails to sort of catch up on things. But I think if a relationship is built primarily through social media and texting, I mean, it's a different type of relationship than a relationship you have with someone that you can physically go get dinner with, right, or hang out with, or you may only see them once a year. So those short sort of messages, and maybe you do them every day, and maybe that makes you feel very connected to the person. Whereas, for me, I don't need that so much. I mean, I have some friends where it's kind of like, oh, I better say hi so they know I'm still around. But I'm more of, trying to make friends and family members that I may not talk to them for a while, but when I talk to them, I talk for a long time. And I actually just spoke with a colleague yesterday that I hadn't talked to in about 3 years, and he just called me, and I was surprised that he had called me, and we ended up talking for a half hour, and it was like, we hadn't talked in a week, but it had been a very long time, so it was because we've had so many long talks and kind of deep conversations and things like that, I think they're just kind of different types of relationships, so it's a little hard sometimes to compare the two. Yeah.
So you think social media can set a function as maintain a relationship, but social media cannot form a relationship with the social media?
I think it can. I think you can form a relationship through social media. I mean, I think there's a lot of people, you look at Facebook or whatever, and people say that they have a lot of friends, but how many of those friends have they ever actually met? How many would they ever actually spend time with? Which then, it's kind of calls into question, well, how many people, do you actually consider friends, as we might normally think of it? But then I think social media can also be an outlet for, let's say, people keeping up with their families, right, or friends that are far away, where they really are friends, and it's just sort of a mode of, let me keep you updated on my life. But I think, it's definitely a different relationship if it's the only way we ever interact or talk is through, Twitter or Facebook or, those sorts of things. Because that's a much different relationship than a traditional friendship or traditional work acquaintance or something like that.
So in this way, do you think the conversation on social media will cause some disorder communication?
I think it, in terms of disorder and order, I think it depends on what form of social media are we talking about. Because I think. Something like Twitter is quite different than something like Facebook, at least in my eyes, and much different than just texting a friend, right? I mean, even though you're sharing messages in each of these different ways are. So I think with the reading that you're referring to, they're talking about basically when someone becomes very needy, right, or starts sending lots of messages and you feel the need to maintain those messages, it can start to wear on a person, right? So if someone's texting you and you text back and then they text you back again,
Yeah.
and you text back and then they text you back again. Now you're starting to feel as though, oh gosh, and so it becomes a, do I stop texting them to sort of just kind of get a break, but then what message does that send to them, right? Like, oh, I'm avoiding you now, so I think it can get quite complicated, and so I think it depends on the person, but I think, my experience is that a lot of people, we tend to analyze these things, right? We tend to say, pay attention to how quickly does someone get back to us, but, I think there is, as, they were looking at in that article, kind of this point at which it's too much, where it's like, okay, you're calling me, you're texting me all the time, it's more than I can handle, especially if it's, someone that you don't feel that close to, or you're starting to not feel as close to. It's, can start to create this weird tension in a relationship.
Yeah, that's
So,
true.
yeah.
I saw the reading that mobile phone increase maintenance expectations positively, predict dependence, which increase satisfaction, and positively predict over-dependence, which decrease satisfaction. So how do you understand close friendship on social media affects relational expectations, over-dependence, and enchantment overall to affect the relationship satisfaction?
Sort of the more you expect people to maintain the relationship and do the work of sending texts or messages and things like that, people start to feel dependent on that, but it also brings their satisfaction. I mean, if you're constantly getting to interact with people, even if it's over text, and I know there's some people who prefer to interact over text than other ways, I think that leads to certain things, but it can also, they're saying, if there becomes over dependence, like over need, then you're starting to be not so satisfied. I send a message, and the next day my friend sends a message, and the next day I send a message. I think that's just sort of saying, well, we're not sending lots of messages. But I think if it starts building to where, we send 40 messages in a day, is it then expected that that's the way it's normally going to be, right? And how often do I need to stay in contact? And so I think there's some sort of, what is this relationship and how do we maintain it? Was that just, well, we just had a real, something big happen that day, so we had a lot of, conversation. I've had this before in terms of like texting, where one day I will end up texting someone, 30 times back and forth, and it's enjoyable, right? And then the next day, you just send a text and you get a very short answer, and maybe send another, and then you don't get a response for a while, and it's kind of like, well, what happened? It's we start playing these games like, what happened? Are they upset with me? Was that just yesterday they had time to text like that? So I think there's a lot, that people may not always talk about it, but I think there's a lot of feelings on the line in terms of, are people paying attention to us? Are they invested, right, in sort of that relationship? And so it's different because, the texts and the Facebook posts and Instagram pictures and the tweets and things, I think, show, especially when they're directed at one particular person or group, that you're thinking about them, that you care about them, that you're producing things for them.
Yeah.
Whereas if you don't have that, people may feel neglected.
Yeah.
So which I get from my family a lot. When I don't update them for a while, they feel as though I'm neglecting them or forgetting about them, and it's just I get busy and fail to do so.
My mother feel the same way.
Yeah. I once a week get a message from my mom, just saying, please update us on how you're doing.
So do you expect your friends to respond to you when you post an idea or photo on social media?
Not being on social media, again, I'll sort of take this as being, think of texting and emailing, and I do expect my friends to respond to me. It may take them a little bit of time. With a text, I expect them to get back to me pretty within a day. With an email, sometimes I know it takes a little bit longer. But I do expect, and I imagine if I was on social media and I were to post something, I would expect people who are my friends, to say something. And I think there is a lot of that, especially amongst younger people, where it's, you didn't make a comment on the picture I posted, or you didn't respond to my, I think there's a lot of expectations, especially with, younger, let's just say students, right, and high school students, that there's a lot of expectation and pressure to respond to when someone sends something.
So how do you think when people have already know what others did in the past few days through Facebook or Twitter or Instagram? So do you think they want to really ask like how it's going, or what did you do last night? Do you think communication in this way is a kind of verification, but not for curiosity?
It might be a little bit of both. I mean, I think it depends on kind of what's going on, but I can imagine a situation where someone sends out a message and says, "Oh my gosh, crazy Friday night," and maybe sends a picture, but doesn't describe whatever the exciting story was until they're face to face with someone or talking to them on the phone, because it might be too involved, right? Or it might be a really good story that they want to share with the person, face to face. But I think it depends, because maybe it's someone who isn't as close a friend and they saw sort of a posting on Facebook, and so maybe they'll kind of quiz the person, right, and sort of say, "So what did you do Friday?" And maybe they say, "I didn't do anything." And they say, "Oh yeah, well I saw your Facebook account. It looked like you were at a party," that sort of thing. So I think there's still some curiosity that can be in there, but it's a little different if you've been updated on things a bit on social media, so you kind of already know a bit of the story before you actually talk to the person. But
I think if people contact with each other more on social network, they will kind of affect their behavior on real world.
Yeah.
I think.
No, I think if the majority of if there's someone who the majority of the communication that they're doing is on social media, yeah, I think it will affect their ability to talk with people face to face. And I mean, you can see it sometimes. I think like if you go out, to eat, and you see people sitting at a table, and all of them are just sitting on their phone, and they might be talking about what they're doing on their phone, but they're, it's sort of, they're hanging out, but they're all doing their individual thing on a phone. I think it does start, all the technology and social media, and especially with younger people coming up with that, growing up with it, I think it's changing sort of the feeling of the importance of face-to-face communication, and also people's sort of social skills, right, and being able to sit down and talk with someone and share ideas. And I mean, you then also see it, and there's people who have different thoughts on this, but you can say, well, if all you do, the majority of what you do is send texts and do things on social media, that starts to change the way in which you think, and it changes the way in which you write, right? So there's usually very different writing styles for those sorts of things. So you can start seeing it in people's work, that it's if they're more used to writing in that sort of style, they might have a hard time adjusting to kind of the traditional school writing. I mean, I think it can lead to some disorders. I think on the flip side of that would be having social media and these other sorts of outlets can be helpful for people with communication disorders, right? If they have speech impediments or difficulties with speaking or hearing, right, then these offer them modes of communicating that may make it more comfortable for them to express themselves. So it's interesting.